Guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to MrBallen, and the video is someone you know was on this plane. From the thumbnail, I'm assuming this is like a plane that crashed. I don't know, but that's what I'm assuming. And yeah, based on the title, I mean, I've seen this been popping up. This has been popping up on my YouTube for a bit now, and I've always been intrigued. It's always caught my eye, so it's always interested me. And I mean, yeah, I thought to react to it now. I didn't actually realise it was from MrBallen. I mean, you can see him in the title, but I didn't realise that. So that's just a plus, because he's probably one of my favourite channels that I react to now. Like, I mean, if I didn't do reactions on YouTube, I would probably just binge watch all of his videos. But obviously, I don't want to just react to his videos all at the same time, because if I react to them all in like the space of a month, what else am I going to react to, kind of thing. But plus I need to do other reactions, not just the same sort of content. But yeah, man, he's really grown on me, and he's definitely, again, like I've said, probably my favourite channel that I'm reacting to at the moment. But yeah, more of them on the way. I mean, you seem to be enjoying the reactions as well, so there's definitely going to be more. So just some of your favourite videos from him, channel similar, and just anything in general, really. But I'm going to jump into this. Shout out to my Instagram and Twitter, links in the description if there's interested in following. Same for my Patreon, links all there. But let's just jump into this one, man. Let's see what you got. Let's see what you got for us today, John. Wait, John? His name is John. I follow him on Instagram. It is John. Wait. I don't want to call him John and his name isn't John. Yeah, it is. It is. About to say, I just gave him the wrong name. But yeah, let's just jump into this.
This story is totally unbelievable. It's shocking. It's a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, the title is
but
wild.
What you'll remember from this story is the twist at the very end. But before we get into today's story...
But how can this even be the case? Is this going to be like one of those sort of things where we all know someone, we've all got a friend of a friend of a friend who... So if I just thought of anyone, I could think of, let's just say Leonardo DiCaprio. I've got a friend who has a friend who has a friend who is friends with Leonardo DiCaprio. That kind of thing. Is it going to be like related to that, or like what? Because it says someone you know. I mean, it's going to be a banger, man. I'm sorry, I just have to sort of picture what I'm thinking to get it out, and maybe people sort of relate. I don't know. But yeah, man,
if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please open all the cans of tuna fish inside the like button's pantry, and then release a gang of feral cats into their house. And then release a gang of... and then release a gang of vicious feral cats inside their house. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.
Legendary lifetime.
On June 25th, 1950, the Korean War broke out between the North Koreans and the South Koreans. Just 2 days after this war had begun, the United States formally entered the conflict by sending troops to aid the South Koreans. Shortly after this, the United States enacted a military draft. A military draft is the forced enlistment of civilians into the military. In the Korean War, the way Americans were chosen was in a lottery, and if their name was called, they would have to stop whatever they were doing in the civilian world and immediately go serve their country. And if they refused, they would go to jail. An 18-year-old high school dropout nicknamed Samson was living with his family in Seattle, Washington when he found out he had been drafted. While military service was not something Samson was considering for his future, he accepted his fate with grace, and before long, he was making his way to Fort Ord in Northern California to begin his military training. But after training, when Samson was now officially a soldier in the army, he was not sent to Korea to fight in the war. Instead, he was ordered to stay at Fort Ord and be the lifeguard for their pool. It's unclear how Samson felt about this, but regardless, he did his duty, and he stayed at this pool and he minded the folks who went swimming, and then at night and on the weekends, he would earn some extra cash by being a bouncer at a local bar. A year later, Samson was still working at the Fort Ord pool when he decided to take some time off and go back home to Seattle and see his family and see his girlfriend. As a military member, Samson was able to fly for free on any military flight so long as he was in uniform. And so Sampson packed up his things, he threw on his uniform, and he made his way over to the Fort Ord Airport, where he hopped on a small military plane and he flew to Seattle. A few days later, on September 30th, 1951, Sampson said goodbye to his family and to his girlfriend, and then he put his uniform back on and made his way to the Seattle airport. When he got there, he saw there was only one military plane that was flying from Seattle all the way down to Fort Ord. And this plane was a World War II era dive bomber that only had enough space for one person, the pilot.
What?
Sampson had to get back to Fort Ord that night because the fall.
I mean, I'd hate to go on a plane in general, but being sort of not forced, but your only choice of plane is a one-man plane, obviously with a pilot and etc. But fuck.
The following day, he had work, and in the army, you can't just not show up for work. But Sampson didn't have enough money to buy a civilian plane ticket to take a.
Crazy, because you can't just call up work and be like, okay, so there's only one plane here, and I don't really want to take it, or you can't give an excuse of like, there's no planes here or whatever. You can't even call up work, so you just have no option. So he's probably pretty much forced into going on it.
Civilian flight down to Fort Ord, so he was in a tough spot. And so he approaches this pilot of this dive bomber plane, and he says, hey, can I just cram into your radar compartment in the back of your plane? And the pilot, whose name was Anderson, immediately said, no, that's a terrible idea. It's not meant for passengers. It's barely big enough to fit inside of. You could get badly hurt in there. But Sampson was adamant that he had to get back that night, that he'd be in so much trouble if he didn't. And he kind of appealed to Anderson and said, look, you're in the military. You get it. I have to get back there tonight. Can you please make an exception and just let me hitch a ride in the back of your plane? And so finally, against his better judgment, Anderson caves and he says, okay, Sampson, you can come with me. And so a little bit before 4 p.m. that afternoon, Sampson eagerly went around to the side of the plane. He opened up a side hatch and he crawled inside of this very tight radar compartment. And once he was tucked up inside, Anderson walked around and he closed the hatch behind him. And then Anderson got in the cockpit and began preparing the plane for takeoff. A few minutes later,
that must be loud as fuck.
The pair was careening down the runway, and right as the plane began to experience lift and was going up into the air, the side hatch of the radar compartment where Sampson was suddenly flew open. The big issue with this now open door in the radar compartment was not that Sampson, like in the movies, would get sucked out this door out to his death, although if he wasn't careful, he totally could fall out of the door. No, the real problem with this now open door had to do with oxygen levels. At their cruising altitude, where the majority of their flight would be spent, there wasn't enough oxygen in the air to sustain human life. And so as soon as Anderson powered up that plane and began preparing it for takeoff, he began pumping oxygen into the cockpit and also into the radar compartment space. This is done specifically to compensate for the lack of oxygen up at that cruising altitude. But with Sampson's door now wide open, all that extra oxygen that was coming into that space to keep him alive is now just being sucked right out the door into the atmosphere, which meant if Sampson couldn't find a way to shut that door, he would eventually pass out and suffocate to death. Sampson, who was fully aware of this fact, immediately jumped into action by anchoring his feet and legs around the stanchion in the middle of this compartment space, and once he was fairly secure, he began extending his upper body out of the plane to try to grab onto the handle to try to shut it. But once he was holding onto that door handle, he's now halfway out of the plane, he could not get it to shut. The wind was so strong it was pinning the door open. And so for the next several minutes, Sampson desperately is trying to get...
He's just halfway out the plane trying to do that. Bloody hell, he's got balls of steel, man. I mean, this situation, he obviously knows what's going to happen, so he's forced into it. But like, still, man, this guy is built different.
Get this door shut, but it's not working. And so eventually he retreated back into the plane and went all the way to the very back of the radar compartment space and tucked himself up behind some equipment. Because this was not an area where passengers were supposed to be, there was no way to communicate with the pilot. He could not tell Anderson that he was dying back here. And so he just sat there and prayed. While Sampson was dealing with this open door crisis, Anderson was dealing with a crisis of his own. At some point after takeoff, he looked down at his gauges and he realized a terrible mistake had been made. there wasn't enough fuel to get to Fort Ord. And where he was discovering it, where he was out over the water, there wasn't enough fuel to even turn around and go back to Seattle. And so Anderson grabs his radio and he tries to call out to these surrounding airports to see if there's anywhere he can just emergency land this plane, but all he hears is silence. It would turn out his radio equipment just happened to fail right at...
But this is just the worst possible situation. Everything is just falling apart, man. You got one thing that's happening and another thing that's happening, and it's just all like leading to one thing, and that's them crashing pretty much. And I mean, I'm assuming that's what's going to happen.
This moment. And what also happened to fail right at that moment was Anderson's oxygen supply. It had nothing to do with Sampson and the open door. Anderson just also suddenly was without oxygen. And so Anderson knew he had to get to a lower altitude as fast as possible because he would eventually pass out and crash the plane. And so he went into a very steep dive and began going down and realized he needed to try to land this plane in the ocean now. There was no way he could get to an airport. And so he's burning down towards the water, and as they're coming down in altitude, there was more oxygen in the air. And so Sampson, who had eventually passed out from a lack of oxygen, is suddenly...
No way he passes out, and he's obviously now come back to consciousness. Just probably at the right time.
With all this additional oxygen as they're going down. And so Sampson comes to and he looks and the door is still wide open and all he can see is the Pacific Ocean burning up at him. He only had a few seconds to grab onto the stanchion in the middle of the space he's in before they impacted the water. Miraculously, Sampson survived the impact, but immediately he was faced with another life and death situation. Because this door was wide open, the freezing cold water began pouring inside, flooding the space. And so Sampson tried to swim his way out, but the power of this water coming in was too strong, and so he had to wait until the space completely flooded before he swam out and then swam up to the surface. Once he got to the surface, he's looking around and the water's incredibly choppy and it's very foggy. He can barely see anything. He's looking around for Anderson, not really sure what happened to him, and he looks down the plane towards the front of the plane and he sees Anderson climbing out of the cockpit. He looks badly beaten up, but he's alive. He's okay. And so Sampson yells to him and the two men link up and they're able to pull two life rafts out of the plane. So both men then get into each of their rafts right as this plane sinks down below the surface. And so Anderson and Sampson begin looking around, wondering what they're going to do, but it's so foggy, they can't see land in any direction. They can barely see 10 feet away from themselves. And so Anderson thought they landed maybe 2 or 3 miles off the coast of California, but they weren't really sure. So Anderson pulled out his compass, he looked east and said, let's just start paddling. The men had crashed about 2 miles off the coast of Point Reyes, California, which is this big protected shoreline that's about 150 miles north of Fort Ord. And this particular stretch of water that these two men had found themselves in was a known breeding ground for great white sharks. So the two men, they got their compass and they're trying to swim as fast as they can to the east, but they're not seeing any land. The fog hasn't let up at all. And then eventually it got dark. And as soon as it got dark, the water got choppier and choppier until at one point Sampson actually was launched out of his raft into the water. He turned around and saw his raft, but it was being pulled away by a current faster than he could swim to it. And so Sampson yells out for Anderson, who sees him in the water. Anderson tries his best to paddle over and save Sampson, but the current was too strong. And before long, Sampson watched as Anderson just disappeared into the fog. Now, Sampson was all alone in the middle of the night. He couldn't see anything. There's no land anywhere. He doesn't have the compass. Anderson had the compass, so he has no idea which direction is what. He's in a shark breeding ground, and now he doesn't have his life raft. And so Sampson did the only thing he could do, which was pick a direction that he believed was east and start swimming. And so Sampson is swimming in this pitch black water. He can't see anything around him. And all he's probably thinking about is how any minute now, I'm going to run out of energy and I'm going to sink down and I'm going to drown, or I'm going to get attacked by sharks, or some combination of the two. But miraculously, after about an hour of swimming in some direction, he broke through the fog and he saw way off in the distance was a light on what looked like dry land. And so he has this sudden burst of energy and he swims as hard and as fast as he possibly can. A couple of times he gets pulled under by rip currents and he nearly drowns, but eventually he gets to the sandy shores of Point Reyes. It's believed he swam approximately 1 or 2 miles after being dumped out of the boat. As he was pulling himself out of the water and collapsed on the beach, he had given everything to that swim. Had he been in the water for even a few more minutes, it's very likely he would have drowned. Unable to stand from pure exhaustion, Samson just began slowly crawling up the beach towards this light he had seen as he was swimming. And it would turn out this light was on the outside of this building that was owned by a radio station. And so Samson is crawling and periodically puking out seawater. And finally, after about 30 or 45 minutes, he gets to the steps of this building. He crawls up the steps and he pounds on the door. And by this point, he's hypothermic, he's in shock, he's about to die if he doesn't get any help. And luckily, there's someone inside of this building. They open it up, they see Samson. They don't know what's going on, but they pick him up, they pull him inside, they wrap him in a blanket, and they try to ask him, what happened? What's going on? Why are you here? But Samson was too cold to even speak, so he just sat there and shook. And so finally, this employee just called the Coast Guard that had a station very close to where they were. And a few minutes later, the Coast Guard shows up, they take Samson, and they rush him to their station house where they were able to give him medical treatment, which saved his life. It was also at this Coast Guard station where Samson was reunited with Anderson, who had also managed to make his way to shore alive. Samson would go on to serve for 2 more years in the Army. The entire time was spent as a lifeguard at the Fort Ord Pool. Then in 1950...
Being a lifeguard really came in handy. Like, god damn. Anyone else in that situation who isn't probably just 99.9% of the level he was at swimming would have drowned. And I mean, even then, people who were probably better than him at swimming, but just maybe don't have didn't have the luck in deciding which direction to go, all that kind of stuff. Like, man, I'm just happy. I'm just so happy that it just sits with the fact that he managed to get out unscathed. Or I say unscathed, managed to get out all right. Like, but geez, man, he just had everything going against him. Literally everything was going against him, and he managed to still get out of the situation. What absolute don, man.
1953, after the Korean War ended, Samson's mandatory service came to an end and he was honorably discharged. Samson would go on to become one of the most successful and well-known actors and producers of all time. He has won hundreds of big awards, including 4 Academy Awards and 4 Golden Globe Awards. Samson's real name is Clint Eastwood. So that's gonna do it, guys.
Fuck off. What? Are you serious? Bro, even I know this guy. I don't even know much about like directors and actors, etc. Oh my days, what an absolute legend. Fuck me. I'm trying to find if it sort of mentions it. It doesn't. It doesn't mention it. I mean, unless I'm being stupid. Fair enough, man. That is crazy.
If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments section what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please open all the cans of tuna fish in the like button's pantry.
I've opened the cans of tuna fish, man. Gave it the like that you deserve. I like how MrBallen is so serious and then you heard a small childish giggle. Imagine being drafted into the army during a war and you end up having the easiest job possible and you still go through the harrowing life and death situation. Yeah, man, fucking hell. He did the only thing he could think of. Me cry. This guy and his plaid shirt collection is unbelievable. Yeah, he's always got the same similar shirts, hasn't he? Clint Eastwood was always a legend. Already a legend. Hearing this is just incredible. Watching him laugh at the horrible things we do to the like button makes you smile. But yeah, Clint Eastwood, I was not expecting that. Flipping hell, that is nuts. What a story. God damn. But yeah, hopefully you did enjoy this reaction. It was a positive one. Usually these videos are quite dark and there's not really a happy ending. I'm happy how this one ended, man. It's given me a little bit of positivity, I don't know, and a bit of shock as well, like just sort of like bamboozled kind of, like it's just crazy how this was about Clint Eastwood. But yeah, until next time, I'll do more reactions from MrBallen, just suggest in the comments. But yeah, until next time, like, subscribe. Peace.